A digital frontier.
Hello lovelies, today we're going to take a look at Outgunned, the cinematic action role-playing game. Now, I picked this up even though it's a lesser known studio and everything, because several reviews have compared it to Feng Shui favourably. I call it Feng Shui to differentiate it from Feng Shui, which, never mind. It's just someone always brings it up. Feng Shui to me is the gold standard of over-the-top action games. First edition, not second edition. And it's often my go-to when I describe a great example of mechanics and genre emulation going together, because Feng Shui it invites you to come up with over-the-top, crazy Hong Kong action cinema, Chow Yun-fat or Jackie Chan moves, and actually rewards you for doing so and being descriptive and so on in what you're trying to do in the game. So yeah, for me, Feng Shui is the gold standard for those sorts of action games, and lots of people were making the comparison in reviews, and I think some of the advertising copy I saw, it was quite hard to get hold of the book. I had to back a Kickstarter or something, a crowdfunding anyway, in order to get it, but I wasn't interested in what they were actually doing as as the actual crowdfunder, which I think was like a superheroes version of this or something. So I backed it and then stripped out the stuff that was actually part of the crowdfunder to get a copy of the book. But hey ho, there you go. Right, Outgunned is slightly bigger than Note format, slightly taller than A5. It is hardcover, decent hardcover, and it is approximately 220 pages. And they're doing other versions of it, supers, as I said. I think that's the current project. So yeah, it was sold to me as a spiritual successor to Feng Shui, and that is an extremely high bar. And spoiler alert, I don't think it really met it. This is a very broad sort of action movie game, coming out at a time when I think people were probably looking for something a bit more John Wick, as in the films, not the game designer John Wick, who has little or nothing to do with the with the other John Wick. It uses six-sided dice. It would be fun to have some nice bullet dice. I've got some somewhere, but they weren't to hand. And it's specifically designed for short arcs of 5 to 8 sessions, so it's very firmly targeted in that most people only play 6 sessions of a game sort of target. They recommend novelty dice, but say you don't need them. That's kind of true, which is good, as the novelty dice aren't particularly available, and you know how I feel about novelty dice. Characters have roles, tropes, attributes and skill points, and 2 free skill points. You can max out during character creation about 3 in each, but stats and things can potentially go up to a total of 6. You get 3 special feats, which are special game advantages. There is a ribbon, which we always like. Gear, and you have pseudo currencies in game for pulling off special stuff called adrenaline and spotlight, and cash is also somewhat abstracted. The roles in the main book, which you create your characters according to, include commando, fighter, ace, agent, face, nobody, brain, sleuth, criminal, and spy. So you can see kind of what they're aiming for, though it does have that problem that kind of takes place where, alright, it's an action game, but how do you accommodate non-action oriented characters in an action oriented game? And that can be tricky. You also define your character by their age. If you're young, then you get less feats, but you get a special feat called Too Young to Die, and you start with 2 adrenaline. Adult characters are the default, and old characters get 1 additional feat, already partly the way dead, and start with 1 experience. The tropes are archetypes and include options like Die Hard, Hunk, and Vigilante. They should be relatively easy to customize if you want to expand things out. Feats provide you with special advantages in the game, so there are examples like hard to kill. So once you start getting really hurt, you gain an extra adrenaline point and you get a bonus to your next roll. If you have a military background, then you get a free reroll for strategy, military history, etc. If you're a gunslinger, you get a free reroll for gun stuff. Your stat plus skill gives you a dice pool, and that's what you roll for all of your actions. When you get hurt, damage is done to something called grit, and you can also take conditions, which is broadly familiar. When you're down and dying, you play Death Roulette, which is basically a game of Russian roulette. You have a tracker, and that tells you how many sort of death points you have, and then you roll and you have a certain chance out of 6 to survive or die. When you spend adrenaline, that can give you a +1 to a roll. Spotlight points are rarer, and they basically allow for you to create an auto success to remove a condition that you're suffering from, or to save a friend from doom. You always roll at least 2 6-sided dice, boink, and you never roll more than 9 6-sided dice, so there's a limit there. When you roll, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get matching numbers. So kind of like playing dice poker in a way, or Yahtzee. If you get 2 of a kind, that's a basic success. 3 of a kind is a critical success. 4 of a kind is an extreme success. 5 of a kind is an impossible success, and 6 or more of a kind is a jackpot. 3 of a lesser kind of success means that it counts as 1 of a higher. So if you get 3 pairs, a pair is normally a basic success. If you get 3 of them, that upgrades to a critical success. If you get 3 of a kinds, which is the best you can get, that's the same as getting 4 of a kind, so a critical success becomes an extreme success. So long as you get at least a pair on your roll, you can re-roll all the dice that aren't already part of a combo. So provided you get basic success, you can re-roll all the other dice to try and improve your roll. And if you don't improve your roll, you lose the successes that you did get initially. If you want, you can also re-roll again, which is called going all in, if you did improve the roll, and try to improve it again. But again, if you fail and don't get it to be more effective, more successful, then you lose all the successes that you did roll. And some things give you re-rolls. The basic issue here is that this is a fundamentally broken dice rolling system, which has all of this bolted onto it in order to compensate for what was clearly some sort of fetish or decision of the makers to go with this dice system. The other disadvantage is it's very hard to tell what you're going to roll, what anyone is going to roll at any point for anything that they try to do. So that makes it quite unpredictable and hard to plan for. Enemies are broken down in a similar way to Feng Shui. That is probably Feng Shui's biggest sort of design influence on the hobby. So you have cannon fodder type goons, you have sort of enemy lieutenants, bad guys, and you have bosses who are much more trouble. Groups are abstracted, so you know, a group of enemies is counted as a single entity for you in combat. And that is pretty much it. I mean, you get some standardized enemies. Enemies have their own resources and feats and so on, so you can customize them to make them a little bit more interesting, make things a little bit more tactical, all of that sort of thing. Here's their examples, as you can see, very simplistically stated. You do get rules for chases, whether they be car chases or otherwise. You know, all of that kind of stuff that's useful. Some ideas on making different kinds of missions and campaigns and so on, which is kind of useful, but a beginner is not going to be picking up Outgunned. So a lot of the advice is fairly generic and probably wasted on a game like this. Rules for experience and what we call experiences, which kind of put me in mind of original Over the Edge, where you could have a character experience work, something like that. And we have a sample adventure, which I tend to always regard as a bit of a waste of time and space, but at least you get some pre-generated characters with it. So what do we think then? Well, it's a fairly generic action game, but that's fine. It doesn't particularly need a world or anything attached to it. Does it do John Wick? Kinda. It's a bit more cartoonish, I think. I would instead look back to some of the 80s action films of the less gritty kind, probably more Arnold Schwarzenegger's oeuvre, so to speak. That seems to be where it seems to fit better to me. Is it a Feng Shui killer? Is it all it's cracked up to be in that score? While there's some kind of vague similarities, I don't think it does capture that same kind of balls out over the topness that Feng Shui has, but nothing really ever has. But it also doesn't really get into the kind of gritty, brutal action that you would see again in something like John Wick, which is probably where it's being aimed to a large extent. Style-wise, it's a nice little book, a nice little object. It is presented in a nice graphical style for the most part. I quite like that. It's easy on the eye, easy to read, more expressive, something a little bit different. There are a few sort of standout pieces of art where you see a bit more, and it's more traditionally well executed, I suppose. So it's hard to fault it on the presentation too much. Where it falls down, I think, is in Feng Shui. Even if you didn't use it, there was at least a game world idea there that you could tap into, and that's not really present here. And it doesn't really succeed in its genre emulation aim. I would say it's like 80% of the way there, but it doesn't quite achieve it. So 4 out of 5 for style. In terms of substance, again, there's stuff missing that you could use. It's not really necessary. It does cover all the rules that you will need. It could have done with more options for enemies, more examples of enemies. The space that was turned over to a sample adventure could very much have been used in other better ways, I think, expanding on the material that was already present in the core book. So in terms of substance, I mean, it's got everything you need, but it doesn't go beyond what you need. and again lacks that expression of a game world that could be useful for some people, instead wasting time on an adventure that you'll at most ever use once. So in terms of substance, I mean, 3 bordering on a 4. I don't particularly want to give it the full 4, but 3 seems ungenerous, and 3.5 makes the maths more complicated. But let's go for 3.5 out of 5 for substance. So that is 7.5 out of 10 overall, and that is 3.75 out of 5 for the other score. So I mean, it's interesting, and it's interesting to see design cues from older games expressed in different ways in newer games. I think what really lets the game down is the dice mechanic and the cloud of uncertainty that settles in once you get down to rolling dice and trying to push your luck and take chances and not really knowing what you're going to get. And the dice pool system really does break down at the lower levels because there aren't really options to get higher level successes in that instance. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's been done in the game to try and fix what is fundamentally a broken dice system, unfortunately. So yeah, there you go, that's my verdict. Still, you might find it interesting, and there are worse options if you want a sort of generic action game. Zang. Go back to where it all started for Postmortem Studios in 2004. Cloak of Steel, remade in French as Mantel d'Acier, created back when Postmortem Studios was trying to be a workers' cooperative. A magipunk fantasy setting of fortress cities and magical mecha, an OGL game with flexible magic and a well-developed world. One day, it'll get a new edition. Until then, you can get it at post-mort.com, DriveThruRPG, and lulu.com.